The sound of thunder rolling across the open range made Georgia Calloway's heart slam against her ribs, not from fear of the storm, but from the terror of what it meant for her cattle scattered across 15 miles of Nevada grassland. She kicked her mare into a harder gallop as the first bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating 200 head of longhorns already starting to panic in the distance, their bellowing carrying on the wind that smelled of rain and electricity. Virginia City sat 20 miles behind her, and between her small ranch and safety lay nothing but open country, gullies that could break a steer's leg, and a storm that threatened to stampede every animal she owned into oblivion. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving her this land and these cattle, and she would be damned if she lost them to a spring thunderstorm in 1876. The cattle were moving now, not running yet, but shifting restlessly as the wind picked up and lightning flashed again, closer this time. Georgia's hair whipped free from its braid, stinging her face as she rode hard toward the herd's eastern edge where they seemed most agitated. She had maybe 10 minutes before they bolted, and alone she had no chance of turning them, but she had to try. The banknote was due in 3 weeks, and without these cattle to sell in Carson City, she would lose everything her family had built over 20 years. Another strike of lightning so close she felt the air crackle, and the cattle broke. 200 animals moving as one panicked mass heading straight for the rocky terrain that would destroy them. Georgia screamed wordlessly and drove her mare forward, trying to get ahead of the leaders, knowing it was hopeless, but unable to stop herself from trying. The thunder was constant now, a rolling boom that shook the ground, and the rain hit like a wall of water, soaking her through in seconds. Then she saw him, appearing out of the rain like a ghost, a tall figure on a big buckskin horse riding hard from the north. He was moving to flank the herd, and she understood his intention immediately. If they could get on either side of the leaders, they might be able to turn them, bend the stampede into a circle that would slow and eventually stop them. She did not know who he was or where he had come from, but she adjusted her angle to match his strategy, trusting this stranger because she had no other choice. Lightning struck so close that her mare screamed and nearly went down, but Georgia held her seat and kept riding. The stranger was opposite her now, 50 yards away across the surging mass of cattle, and she could see him waving his hat, shouting, though she could not hear the words over the thunder and the pounding hooves. She did the same, pushing her mare right up against the leaders, forcing them to veer left. The buckskin was doing the same on the other side, and slowly, impossibly, the herd began to turn. It took another 5 minutes of desperate riding through lightning that struck 3 more times, close enough that Georgia saw the bolts hit the ground and throw up dirt. Her mare was lathered and wild-eyed, and her own hands were shaking on the reins, but the cattle were circling now, slowing, the panic draining out of them as the herd instinct to stay together overcame the impulse to run. The stranger kept pace with her, never letting up until the last steer had settled into an uneasy milling walk, and then he rode toward her through the rain. He was young, maybe 25 to her 22, with dark hair plastered to his head and eyes so blue they looked unreal in his tanned face. "You all right?" he shouted over the storm. "Yes," she shouted back. And then the adrenaline caught up with her, and she started laughing, half hysterical with relief. "Thank you. God, thank you. I could not have done that alone." "Nobody could have," he said, bringing his horse alongside hers. "I am Ashton Brooks. I was heading into Virginia City when I saw the storm hit and figured somebody might be in trouble." "Georgia Calloway. This is my herd." She wiped rain from her face uselessly, since more immediately took its place. "You saved my life tonight. My livelihood anyway, which amounts to the same thing." The storm was beginning to ease, the lightning moving east, and the rain settling into a steady downpour instead of a deluge. The cattle were calm now, grazing even, as if they had not nearly killed themselves 10 minutes ago. Ashton looked at them and then at Georgia, and something in his expression made her suddenly aware that she was soaked through, her shirt clinging to her body, her hair a wild mess around her shoulders. We should get them moving towards shelter, he said, looking away. There is a box canyon about 2 miles south. I passed it earlier. We can hold them there until the rain stops. I know the place, Georgia said. Help me get them there, and I will buy you dinner in town. It is the least I can do. You do not owe me dinner, Ashton said. But he was smiling a little, and Georgia felt something warm unfurl in her chest despite the cold rain. They worked together in silence, moving the herd south at an easy pace. The cattle were tired enough to be docile now, and with 2 riders it was simple work to keep them pointed in the right direction. The canyon appeared out of the rain like a promise, high walls on 3 sides and good grass on the floor, and the cattle settled immediately once they were inside. Georgia dismounted and checked her mare's legs, then started walking through the herd doing a quick count and looking for injuries. I count 198, Ashton called from the other side, and looks like we lost 2. Better than losing them all, Georgia said. She found him near the canyon mouth, standing with his hand on his horse's neck, both of them dripping. Seriously, let me buy you that dinner. You rode through hell for me tonight, and I do not even know you. I would like that, Ashton said quietly. The dinner and the getting to know you both. The rain was stopping now, the clouds breaking up to show stars and a quarter moon. In the pale light, Georgia could see him better. The strong line of his jaw, the broad shoulders, the way he stood like a man comfortable in his own skin. He was looking at her the same way, and she felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with exertion. I have a line shack about a mile from here, she said. We can wait there until dawn, then move the herd back to my ranch in daylight. It would be safer than trying to ride back to town in the dark. All right, Ashton said, and there was something in his voice that made her pulse quicken. The shack was small and rough, just 4 walls and a roof with a potbelly stove and 2 bunks, but it was dry and she had left firewood stacked beside the stove on her last visit. Georgia got a fire going while Ashton tended the horses, and by the time he came inside, she had stripped off her soaked outer shirt and was standing in her undershirt and pants, hanging the wet garment near the stove. She heard him stop in the doorway and turn to find him staring. Sorry, he said quickly. I should have knocked. It is a line shack, not a house, Georgia said, amused despite her embarrassment. And we are both adults. Hang your coat up before you catch your death. He did, moving carefully like he was trying not to crowd her in the small space. With his coat off, she could see how broad his shoulders really were, and the way his wet shirt clung to the muscles of his chest and arms. He caught her looking, and she turned quickly back to the fire, her face burning. So you run this ranch alone? He asked after a moment, his voice determinedly casual. Since my father died in October, Georgia said, it is not a big operation, 300 acres and 200 head of cattle, but it is mine, and I will not lose it. That is why you rode out into the storm, Ashton said. It was not a question. I have a banknote due in 3 weeks. I need to sell half the herd to make the payment. If I had lost them tonight... She did not finish the sentence. What about you? You said you were heading to Virginia City. Looking for work? Looking for a place to settle, Ashton said. He settled onto one of the bunks, keeping a respectful distance. I have been drifting since I mustered out of the army 2 years ago, cowboying here and there, never staying long. But I am tired of moving. I want land of my own, a reason to stay somewhere. What did you do in the army? Georgia asked, sitting on the other bunk. Cavalry. Spent 4 years riding all over Wyoming and Montana, saw things I would rather forget. His expression darkened for a moment, then cleared. But I learned to ride and to work cattle and to think fast in a bad situation. That counts for something. It counts for everything tonight, Georgia said. I meant what I said about being grateful. If there is anything I can do to repay you, just name it. Ashton looked at her for a long moment, and the air in the small shack seemed to thicken. You could tell me you're not married or promised to anyone, he said finally. Georgia's heart jumped. I am not. Are you? No. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and almost boyish. I am not much for pretty words, but I am going to be honest with you. I saw you from half a mile away, riding hell-bent toward that storm, and I thought you were either crazy or the bravest person I had ever seen. Then I got closer and saw your face, and I forgot how to breathe for a second. I've been trying to think of an excuse to stay around Virginia City ever since we stopped those cattle, and I am not usually the kind of man who gets tongue-tied around a woman." "You're doing fine so far," Georgia said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. "And for what it is worth, when you came out of that rain like an answer to a prayer, my first thought after thank God was that you were the handsomest man I had ever seen, even soaking wet and covered in mud." "Well then," Ashton said and stood up, crossing the small space between them. "May I kiss you, Georgia Calloway?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. And then his hands were gentle on her face and his mouth was on hers, and she forgot about the cattle and the banknote and everything except the taste of rain and the warmth of his lips. He kissed her like she was precious, like he had all the time in the world, and when he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I should not have done that," he said, but he did not sound sorry. "We just met." "I am glad you did," Georgia said. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "Stay, please. Not just tonight. I need help with the ranch, and I can pay a fair wage. Stay and let me get to know you properly." "I will stay as long as you will have me," Ashton said, and kissed her again. They talked through the rest of the night, sitting close together on one bunk while the fire burned down and the stars wheeled overhead outside. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, joining the Army at 18 when his parents died of cholera, the long years of fighting and riding and trying to keep the peace in territories that did not want peace. She told him about her childhood on the ranch, learning to ride before she could walk, her mother dying when she was 12, and leaving her to keep house for her father. The bitter grief of watching him fade after a riding accident left him with broken ribs that never healed right. "He held on long enough to see the fall gather," Georgia said quietly. "Then he just seemed to give up. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think he was just tired. Tired of fighting to keep this place going, tired of being in pain. He went peaceful in his sleep, and I was grateful for that at least." "And you decided to keep the ranch going alone," Ashton said. "What else would I do? This is my home. My father built it from nothing, and my grandfather homesteaded the original 100 acres back in 58. I am not going to be the one who loses it." She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling exhausted and strangely content. "But it is hard. Harder than I thought it would be. I can handle the cattle and the ranch work, but the bookkeeping and the business side, dealing with the bank and the buyers, they do not want to take me seriously because I am a woman." "Then they are fools," Ashton said. "Anyone who could do what you did tonight deserves to be taken very seriously indeed." Georgia smiled and closed her eyes. She did not mean to fall asleep, but the warmth of the fire and the solid presence of Ashton beside her pulled her under, and she woke to find pale dawn light coming through the shack's single window, and Ashton's coat draped over her like a blanket. He was outside already, and when she went to join him, she found him saddling both horses. "Morning," he said, turning to smile at her. "I checked the herd. They are all accounted for and look good. We can move them whenever you're ready." "Let me get the fire out and we will go," Georgia said. The morning was cool and fresh, washed from the rain, and the world seemed brighter somehow, full of possibility. They rode back to the canyon and gathered the cattle, working together with the ease of people who had been partnering for years instead of hours, and by mid-morning they had the herd back on Georgia's land and settled in the home pasture. The ranch house was small but well built, logs chinked tight, and a good stone chimney with a barn and corral that showed careful maintenance. Georgia dismounted in the yard and gestured around. "This is it. The Calloway Ranch. Not much to look at, but it is home." "It is a fine place," Ashton said, and she could tell he meant it. "You should be proud." "Come inside and I will make breakfast," Georgia said. "Then we can talk about terms if you're serious about staying on to work." Over eggs and bacon and strong coffee they negotiated. Georgia offered $30 a month, plus room and board, which was standard wages for a cowhand, and Ashton accepted immediately. "I can start today," he said. "What needs doing first?" "Everything," Georgia said with a laugh. The south fence has 3 sections down. I have got about 20 calves that need branding, and I need to ride into Virginia City tomorrow to arrange shipping for the cattle I am selling. But today, honestly, I think we both need to rest. We were up all night and we rode through a lightning storm. The work will still be there in the morning." "All right," Ashton said, "then let me at least help you with the horses and the morning chores, and then I will get out of your way." They worked together through the midday, and Georgia found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, admiring the competent way he moved, the gentleness with which he handled the animals. He caught her staring once and grinned, and she felt her face heat but did not look away. There was something building between them, something that went beyond gratitude or attraction, and it thrilled and terrified her in equal measure. That evening she made dinner and invited him to eat in the house instead of the bunkhouse, and they sat at her small table and talked like old friends. When he finally left for the night, he paused at the door and looked back at her. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting me, for giving me a chance." "Thank you for riding through that storm with me," Georgia said. "I will see you in the morning." But she dreamed of him that night and woke with her heart racing and the memory of his kiss burning on her lips. The next weeks fell into a pattern that felt both strange and utterly natural. Ashton proved to be everything Georgia could have hoped for in a ranch hand and more. He worked from dawn until dusk without complaint, repairing fence, branding calves, breaking a half-wild gelding that Georgia had been avoiding for months. He was good with the cattle and better with the horses, and he had a steady reliability that she had not realized she desperately needed until he was there providing it. But it was more than just his work that made the days feel different. It was the way he smiled at her over morning coffee, the way he listened when she talked about her plans for the ranch, the way he seemed to understand without being told when she needed help, and when she needed to prove she could handle something herself. It was the way her heart lifted every time she saw him, and the way the house felt empty when he left for the bunkhouse at night. They rode into Virginia City together on a warm May morning to arrange the cattle shipment, and Georgia was acutely aware of the looks they got as they walked down the main street together. Ashton was tall and handsome and clearly protective of her, staying close in the crowds, and she knew people were already starting to talk. Virginia City was a town that ran on gossip, and a single woman with a handsome hired man living on her property was prime material for speculation. At the bank, she met with Mr. Harrison, the manager who held her note. He was a portly man in his 50s with mutton-chop whiskers and an air of condescension that set Georgia's teeth on edge. "Miss Calloway," he said, looking past her to Ashton. "And who is this?" "My ranch foreman," Georgia said, the lie coming easily. Ashton was just a hired hand, but she knew that foreman sounded more respectable. "Ashton Brooks. He is helping me prepare the cattle for shipment." "I see." Mr. Harrison did not offer to shake Ashton's hand. "Well, Miss Calloway, I trust you remember that your note comes due on the 15th of June. That is less than 4 weeks away. Do you have the funds?" "I will have them when I sell my cattle," Georgia said, keeping her voice level despite her anger at his tone. "I am shipping 100 head to Carson City next week. The buyer is already arranged and the price is agreed." "I hope for your sake that is true," Mr. Harrison said, "because I would hate to see you lose your father's ranch. Of course, if you were to marry, your husband could take over the note and you would not have to worry about such things." Georgia felt Ashton tense beside her, but she kept her own expression neutral. "I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Mr. Harrison, you will have your money on time." Outside the bank, Ashton said tightly, "That man is a snake." "He is a banker," Georgia said. "It amounts to the same thing, but he is right about one thing. I need to get those cattle sold or I will lose everything." "We will get them sold," Ashton said firmly. "And if Harrison gives you any more trouble, he will have me to deal with." Georgia looked up at him. This man who had ridden through lightning for her, who had stayed and worked and somehow become essential to her life in just a few weeks, and felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked quietly. "You could work anywhere. Why stay here and help me?" Ashton stopped walking and turned to face her fully. They were standing in the middle of the board sidewalk, people flowing around them, but he did not seem to notice anyone else. "You really do not know?" he asked. "I want to hear you say it," Georgia said. "Because I am falling in love with you," Ashton said simply. "I think I started falling that first night watching you ride into danger without hesitation. And every day since then has just made it worse. Or better. I am not sure which." He reached out and took her hand. "Right there in public where anyone could see. I know it is too soon, and I have got nothing to offer you but hard work and a willing heart. But there it is. I love you, Georgia Calloway." Georgia felt tears prick her eyes, but she was smiling so hard her face hurt. "It is not too soon," she said, "and you have everything to offer me. I love you too, Ashton Brooks. I think I have since you appeared out of that storm like an answer to a prayer." He kissed her then, heedless of the scandalized looks from passing townsfolk, and Georgia kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she said, "We should get back to the ranch. We have work to do if we are going to get those cattle ready to ship." "Yes, madam," Ashton said, grinning, and they rode home together with their hands linked between their horses, laughing like children. That night after dinner, Georgia invited Ashton to stay in the house instead of going back to the bunkhouse. They sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, and she leaned against his shoulder, feeling more content than she had in months. "What are we doing?" she asked quietly. "We have known each other less than a month." "We are giving ourselves a chance at happiness," Ashton said. He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "I meant what I said in town. I love you, and if you will have me, I want to marry you. Not because you need a husband to satisfy the bank or the gossips, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it now." "Yes," Georgia said immediately. "Yes, I will marry you, but not until after I make that bank payment. I need to know I can do this on my own, that I'm not just handing the ranch over to a husband because I cannot manage it myself." "I would never think that," Ashton said, but he nodded. "All right. We will pay off Harrison first, and then we will get married. But I am moving my things into the house tonight because I'm tired of sleeping alone when the woman I love is 50 yards away." Georgia laughed and kissed him. "That seems fair." The next 3 weeks were a blur of hard work and stolen moments of tenderness. They gathered the cattle to be sold and drove them to the railhead in Carson City, a 3-day journey that tested every skill Georgia had. Ashton rode beside her the whole way, helping to keep the herd together and handling the inevitable problems that arose. One steer broke a leg and had to be shot, and they lost half a day hunting for a dozen animals that wandered off in the night, but they made it to Carson City with 98 head and sold them all to the buyer for a fair price. Georgia took the money in banknotes and cash and felt the weight of it in her saddlebags like a physical relief. "We did it," she said to Ashton as they rode away from the buyer's office, "as we actually did it." "You did it," Ashton said. "I just helped." "We did it together," Georgia corrected. "And we are going to keep doing things together for the rest of our lives if I have anything to say about it." They rode back to Virginia City and went straight to the bank. Mr. Harrison looked sour when Georgia laid out the full payment plus the interest due, but he could not argue with cash and notes. "Congratulations, Miss Calloway," he said stiffly. "Your note is paid in full. I will have the paperwork drawn up releasing the lien on your property." "Thank you," Georgia said, and walked out with her head high and Ashton's hand in hers. They were married a week later by the minister in Virginia City, with the town's dressmaker as witness. Georgia wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, and Ashton wore his best shirt and a new vest he had bought special for the occasion. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ashton kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. The town gave them a shivaree that night, banging pots and pans outside the ranch house until Ashton came out and good-naturedly handed around a bottle of whiskey. Georgia stood in the doorway laughing, watching her new husband charm the neighbors who had come to harass them, and felt a surge of love so strong it almost hurt. This man, who had ridden through lightning beside her, who had worked himself to exhaustion to help her save her ranch, who loved her with a steadiness and strength she had never dared hope for, was hers now. They were married, and the ranch was hers free and clear, and the future stretched out before them full of promise. When the last of the well-wishers finally left, Ashton came back inside and scooped Georgia up in his arms, making her squeal with surprise. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said, kicking the door shut behind them. "It is traditional." "We have been living together for a month," Georgia pointed out, but she was smiling. "That was different. Now you are my wife." He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "My wife? I do not think I will ever get tired of saying that." "Good," Georgia said, reaching up to unbutton his vest, "because I do not think I will ever get tired of hearing it." They made love that night with the tenderness of new lovers and the passion of people who had already learned each other's bodies, and Georgia fell asleep in Ashton's arms feeling safer and happier than she could ever remember being. The summer passed in a haze of work and love. They worked the ranch together, branding the new calves, moving the cattle to fresh pasture, making repairs to the buildings and fences. Ashton proved to have a good head for the business side of ranching, and together they made plans to expand the operation, buying breeding stock and fencing another 100 acres of open range. Georgia taught him how to keep the books, and he taught her tricks for gentling horses that he had learned in the cavalry. They fought sometimes, both of them being strong-willed and used to independence, but they always made up before the sun set. Georgia learned that Ashton went quiet when he was angry, withdrawing into himself, and that the best way to break through was to give him space for a little while and then approach gently. Ashton learned that Georgia needed to feel heard and respected, that she would dig her heels in twice as hard if she felt patronized, and that she was always willing to listen to reason once she felt her point had been acknowledged. In August, Georgia realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another 3 weeks to be sure, and then told Ashton one evening after dinner. "I think I'm pregnant," she said quietly, watching his face. He went very still, and for a moment she worried he was unhappy about it. Then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to Virginia City. "Pregnant," he said, picking her up and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby. Georgia, that is wonderful." "You are happy then," she said, laughing with relief. "Happy? I am over the moon." He set her down carefully, like she was made of glass. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be working so hard?" "I am fine," Georgia said firmly. "I am pregnant, not made of china. Women have been having babies and running ranches for centuries. I can do both." But Ashton fussed over her anyway, and she found she did not mind as much as she thought she would. He took on more of the heavy work and insisted she rest in the afternoons, and he started talking to her belly at night before they went to sleep, telling the baby about the ranch and the horses, and how much he was looking forward to teaching them to ride. "What if it is a girl?" Georgia asked one night, amused. "Not all girls want to learn to ranch." "Then she will be like her mother," Ashton said, kissing Georgia's still flat stomach. "And she will be able to do anything she sets her mind to, but I have a feeling it is a boy. Do not ask me why. I just do." He was right. Georgia went into labor on a cold March morning in 1877 with snow falling outside and Ashton pacing the floor while the midwife from Virginia City worked. It was a long labor, nearly 12 hours, and there were moments when Georgia thought she could not do it, that she would die right there in the bed where she had been born. But Ashton held her hand through it all, wiping her face with cool cloths and telling her she was strong, she could do this just a little while longer. And then suddenly the baby was there, red-faced and squalling, and the midwife was saying, "It is a boy, a fine, healthy boy," and laying him on Georgia's chest. She looked down at the tiny wrinkled face and felt her heart crack open with love. Ashton was crying openly, his hand gentle on the baby's dark head. And when Georgia looked up at him, she saw her own overwhelming emotion reflected in his eyes. "What should we name him?" she asked. "Thomas," Ashton said immediately, "after your father." Thomas Calloway Brooks? Georgia nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Her father would have loved this, would have been so proud to meet his grandson. Thomas, she whispered to the baby, welcome to the world, little one. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered under their combined management, growing to 500 head of cattle and 400 acres. They hired 2 more hands to help with the work and built a bigger house with 4 bedrooms and a real parlor. Thomas grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination, and when he was 3, Georgia gave birth to a daughter they named Clara. Clara was quieter than her brother, more thoughtful, with Georgia's brown eyes and Ashton's easy smile. She followed Georgia around the house learning to cook and sew, but she also loved to be outside helping her father with the horses. By the time she was 5, she could ride as well as any adult, and she had a way with animals that bordered on magical. Thomas, meanwhile, showed an interest in the business side of ranching that delighted Georgia. By age 8, he was helping her with the books, and he had a head for numbers that suggested he might go far if he chose to pursue education beyond the small school in Virginia City. In 1882, when Thomas was 5 and Clara was 2, Ashton came home one evening with news. I ran into a rancher from California today, he said over dinner. He's looking to buy breeding stock, and he's willing to pay premium prices for quality animals. I think we should sell him some of our heifers. Georgia considered it. They had built up good breeding lines over the years, and their cattle were known throughout Nevada for their hardiness and size. How premium are we talking? 50% above market rate, Ashton said. He wants 20 head, and he will pay in cash. Then we should do it, Georgia said. That money could go toward buying the Peterson place if it comes up for sale like everyone says it will. The Peterson Ranch adjoined their northern border, another 200 acres with good water and better grazing. Old man Peterson had no children and was getting too frail to work the land, and Georgia had been keeping an eye on it for years. If they could buy it when he retired, the Calloway Ranch would be one of the biggest operations in the territory. The sale went through, and 6 months later they bought the Peterson place for a fair price that still stretched their finances to the limit. But it was worth it. With the additional land and their growing reputation, they were able to charge higher prices for their cattle and attract better buyers. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Georgia and Ashton's love only deepened with time. They still worked side by side every day, and they still made time to sit on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset, talking about their plans and dreams. "Do you ever regret it?" Georgia asked one evening in the summer of 1885. They were watching Thomas and Clara play in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm air. "Tying yourself down to one place, one woman?" Ashton looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Regret you? Regret this?" He gestured at the ranch, the children, the life they had built. "Georgia, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. That night I rode through the storm beside you. That was the night my real life started. Everything before that was just waiting." Georgia leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I love you," she said. "I do not think I say it enough, but I do. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "I love you too," Ashton said, kissing the top of her head, "and I will keep loving you until the day I die, and probably beyond that too." In 1887, Georgia gave birth to their third and final child, another boy they named James. He was an easy baby, sunny-tempered and content, and he completed their family in a way that felt right and whole. Thomas was 10 by then and Clara was 7, and they both doted on their baby brother with an affection that warmed Georgia's heart. The children grew up knowing the value of hard work and the importance of family. Thomas went away to school in San Francisco when he was 16, studying business and law, but he came back every summer to work the ranch. Clara never wanted to leave, turning down multiple marriage proposals to stay on the land she loved, working beside her father training horses. James was still young, but he showed signs of his mother's fierce independence and his father's steady reliability. In 1895, when Georgia was 41 and Ashton was 44, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that brought people from all over the territory. The ranch was thriving, the children were healthy and happy, and they had built a life together that exceeded Georgia's wildest dreams from that stormy night when a stranger rode out of the lightning to help her save her herd. 20 years, Ashton said that night, holding her close as they danced to the music the hired fiddler was playing. It feels like no time at all, and a whole lifetime both. I could not have done any of it without you, Georgia said. The ranch, the children, all of it, you made it possible. We made it possible, Ashton corrected. Together. That has always been the secret, hasn't it? We are better together than either of us could be alone. Always, Georgia agreed, and kissed him there in front of all their friends and neighbors and children, not caring who saw. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. They lost horses to accidents and cattle to harsh winters. They weathered droughts and floods, market crashes and personal tragedies. But through it all, Georgia and Ashton faced everything side by side, just as they had faced that lightning storm on their first night together. Thomas married a woman from Carson City and took over managing the business side of the ranch, freeing Georgia to focus on the breeding program she had always wanted to develop. Clara eventually married a neighboring rancher, not for his land or his money, but because she genuinely loved him, and she continued to work with the horses on both properties. James, when he grew up, showed an interest in politics and eventually became a lawyer in Virginia City, though he never moved away from the land where he was born. Georgia and Ashton grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminished. They still sat on the porch every evening, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren who were starting to arrive. "Do you remember that night?" Georgia asked one evening in the spring of 1910. She was 66 years old now, her hands gnarled with arthritis, her face lined with age, but her eyes were still as sharp and bright as they had been at 22. "The lightning storm?" "Every detail," Ashton said. He was 69. His dark hair now completely white, his blue eyes faded but still beautiful. "I remember thinking you were either insane or the bravest woman I had ever seen riding toward that herd alone. I remember you appearing out of the rain and thinking you were an angel," Georgia said, "or maybe a miracle." "Just a drifter looking for a place to belong," Ashton said, "and I found it, with you, in you. You are my home, Georgia Brooks. You always have been." Georgia felt tears slide down her weathered cheeks, but she was smiling. "And you are mine, from that first night and every night since. Through the lightning and the calm, through the good times and the bad, you have been beside me through every strike." "Always, Vika," Ashton said, and kissed her with the tenderness of 50 years of love. They lived to see their children grow into capable, confident adults who ran the ranch with the same dedication and partnership that their parents had modeled. They lived to see their grandchildren grow and thrive, carrying on the Calloway and Brooks names with pride. They lived to see the ranch expand to over 1,000 acres, one of the most successful operations in Nevada, built on the foundation of two people who had ridden through lightning together and never let go. Georgia passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1915 at the age of 71. Ashton followed her 6 months later, unable to imagine a life without the woman who had been his partner, his love, his everything for nearly 40 years. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as wide and blue as the one they had ridden under that stormy night so long ago. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, and Thomas, now 58 years old and silver-haired, stood at the grave and told the story of how his parents had met. "My mother was riding through lightning to save her herd," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "and my father rode beside her through every strike. That was their love story in miniature, Through every challenge, every hardship, every joy, they faced it together. They built this ranch together, raised us together, grew old together, and now they rest together in the land they loved, surrounded by the family they created. The Calloway Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family with the same values that Georgia and Ashton had instilled. The story of the night they met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder of the power of courage and love and partnership. And sometimes, on stormy nights when lightning split the sky over the Nevada grasslands, ranch hands swore they could see two figures riding through the rain, side by side, forever chasing a herd that no longer needed saving, forever together as they had always been in life. The ranch house that Ashton had helped build and expand still stood strong well into the 20th century, weathered but solid, a testament to the quality of the work and the love that had gone into its construction. The porch where Georgia and Ashton had spent countless evenings watching sunsets became a gathering place for family reunions, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren sitting in the same spots, looking out over the same land, connected across time by blood and memory and the enduring legacy of two people who had loved each other fiercely and well. Clara, who lived to be 92, often told her own grandchildren about her parents' love story. They were partners in the truest sense, she would say, rocking slowly in the chair that had been her mother's. Not just in marriage, but in everything. They respected each other, trusted each other, built each other up. When Mama died, it was like half of Papa died too. And when he followed her, nobody was surprised. They belonged together, those two, from the moment he rode through that storm to help her. The family kept the tradition of partnership alive. Sons and daughters worked the ranch together. Husbands and wives made decisions jointly. Nobody person ever held all the power or bore all the burden, because Georgia and Ashton had taught them that strength came from unity, that two people working together could accomplish what one person alone never could. The financial records from those early years, carefully preserved by Thomas and his descendants, showed the steady growth of the ranch under Georgia and Ashton's management. From the desperate scramble to pay off that first banknote in 1876 to the thriving operation they handed down to their children, every entry told a story of hard work, smart decisions, and unwavering commitment. But it was not just the financial success that mattered. The letters Georgia and Ashton had written to each other during the rare times they were apart revealed a deep, emotional intimacy that transcended the practical partnership of running a ranch. Ashton's words spoke of admiration and passion and gratitude for the life they had built. Georgia's words spoke of trust and desire, and the bone-deep certainty that she had found her soulmate in the man who rode through lightning beside her. One letter, written by Ashton during a cattle-buying trip to California in 1880, captured the essence of their relationship. "My dearest Georgia," it read, "I have been gone only 3 days, and already I miss you like I would miss breathing. Not just your pretty face or your warm body beside me at night, though I miss those too, but your mind, your voice, your laugh, the way you challenge me to think harder and do better. The way you understand me without needing words. We are building something remarkable together, you and I. Not just a ranch, but a life, a family, a legacy. And I cannot wait to get home and keep building it beside you." Georgia's response, practical and loving in equal measure, showed her own depth of feeling. "My darling Ashton," she wrote, "the ranch is running smoothly and the children are well, so do not worry about us. Take the time you need to find the right cattle at the right price. But come home soon, because the bed is cold without you and I find myself talking to you even though you are not here. You are more than my husband. You are my best friend, my partner, my match in every way that matters. I love you beyond measure." These letters, preserved by their descendants, became precious family heirlooms, tangible proof of the love story that had founded the Calloway dynasty. School children studying local history learned about Georgia Calloway Brooks, the woman who had held onto her ranch against all odds and built it into a thriving enterprise, But those who knew the full story understood that she had not done it alone. She had done it with Ashton beside her, through lightning and calm, through every challenge and triumph. The town of Virginia City, which had been so skeptical of a single woman running a ranch in 1876, came to hold Georgia and Ashton up as an example of pioneering spirit and marital partnership. When the town celebrated its centennial in the 1960s, the Historical Society created an exhibit about the early ranching families, and Georgia and Ashton's story featured prominently. The photograph of them taken on their 40th wedding anniversary in 1916, just months before Georgia's death, showed two elderly people sitting close together on a porch, their hands clasped, their faces weathered but content. The love in their eyes was unmistakable even in the faded sepia tones. The exhibit included the story of how they met, and visitors often commented on the romance of it. A woman riding through a lightning storm to save her herd, a stranger appearing out of nowhere to help her, love blossoming in a line shack during a rainy night. It sounded like a dime novel, but it was all true, documented in letters and journal entries and the memories of those who had known them. But the real testament to Georgia and Ashton's love was not in museums or history books. It was in the way their family conducted themselves, the values they passed down, the standard they set for what marriage and partnership could be. Every Brooks and Calloway descendant grew up knowing the story, knowing that their family had been built on a foundation of mutual respect, hard work, and deep, abiding love. On the ranch itself, the places where Georgia and Ashton had worked and lived became almost sacred. The box canyon where they had sheltered the cattle during that first storm was known as Storm Canyon by the family, and young couples in love would ride there to watch the sunset and make promises to each other. The line shack where they had spent their first night together was preserved and maintained, a small museum to their beginning, and the hill where they were buried became a place of pilgrimage for family members seeking inspiration or comfort. Thomas, before he died in 1935 at the age of 58, commissioned a headstone for his parents' grave that captured the essence of their story. It was simple granite, weathered now by decades of Nevada sun and wind, and it read, Georgia Calloway Brooks, 1854-1915, and Ashton Brooks, 1851-1916. She rode through lightning to save her herd. He rode beside her through every strike. Together they built a legacy of love and partnership that endures still. The words became almost a family motto, invoked at weddings and anniversaries, a reminder of what real partnership looked like. Young brides and grooms would stand at that grave on their wedding day, holding hands and promising each other to face life's storms together, just as Georgia and Ashton had done. The ranch prospered through the Great Depression, through world wars, through the massive changes that transformed the American West in the 20th century. The Calloway Brooks family adapted and evolved, adding new technologies and techniques while holding on to the core values that Georgia and Ashton had established. Through it all, the story of the founders remained central to the family identity. In 1976, the family celebrated the centennial of the night Georgia and Ashton had met. Over 200 descendants gathered at the ranch for a weekend of celebration and remembrance. They rode horses through Storm Canyon, had a dance in the barn, and stood together on the hill overlooking the ranch while the oldest family member, Clara's daughter Martha, now 93 years old, told the story one more time. My grandmother was 22 years old, Martha said, her voice thin with age but still strong. She had just lost her father and was in danger of losing everything he had built. She could have given up. She could have sold out and moved to town and found an easier life. But she was a Calloway, and Calloways do not give up. So when that storm came and threatened her cattle, she rode out to save them, alone if she had to. The crowd, made up of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, listened in rapt silence. They had all heard this story before, but it never got old. And my grandfather, Martha continued, was a drifter looking for a place to belong. He saw a woman in trouble and he rode to help her, not because he knew her or because he expected payment, but because it was the right thing to do. And in doing that one right thing, he found everything he had been searching for. Martha paused, looking out over the assembled family, and her old eyes filled with tears. They fell in love that night, I think. Fell in love with each other's courage and strength and determination. And they spent the next 40 years proving that love every single day, working together, building together, growing together. They taught us what partnership means. They taught us that love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every day. They taught us that the person you love should be the person you respect most in the world, the person you trust to stand beside you through every storm. The family stood in silence for a moment, honoring the memory of the two people who had started it all. Then they dispersed to continue the celebration, but the moment stayed with many of them, a reminder of their heritage and their responsibility to carry it forward. The Calloway Ranch continued through the end of the 20th century and into the 21st, one of the few family ranches in Nevada to survive the consolidation and corporatization of American agriculture. The family credited their success to the foundation Georgia and Ashton had laid, the principle of partnership and shared responsibility that had been their guiding light. And on stormy nights, when lightning still split the Nevada sky and rain lashed the grasslands, family members would sometimes stand at their windows and think of a young woman riding desperately toward her panicked herd and a young man appearing out of the storm to help her. They would think of that first kiss in a rough line shack, of a love that had grown and deepened over 40 years, of a partnership that had built an empire and founded a legacy. Georgia and Ashton Brooks had been gone for over a century, but their love story lived on, passed down through generations, a beacon of hope and inspiration for anyone who believed in the power of courage, partnership, and love. They had ridden through lightning together once, and in doing so had illuminated the path for all who came after them, showing that the greatest adventures begin when two people choose to face the storms of life side by side, never wavering, never letting go, together until the very end and beyond. Their story became more than just family history, it became legend, a tale told around campfires and dinner tables throughout the West. It inspired songs and poems, including a ballad written by a great-great-grandson who became a country music singer in Nashville. The song, Through the Lightning, told their story in 3 verses and a chorus, and it climbed the country charts in 2005, introducing Georgia and Ashton's love to a whole new generation. People would visit Virginia City specifically to see the Calloway Ranch and hear the story. The family eventually started giving tours, showing visitors the places where Georgia and Ashton had lived and worked, telling the tale of how they met and fell in love and built something lasting together. The tours always ended at the grave site on the hill, where visitors could stand and look out over the ranch that had started with 2 people and a dream and a willingness to ride through lightning together. The legacy of that stormy night in April 1876 reached far beyond one family or one ranch. It became a symbol of the pioneering spirit, of the courage and determination that had built the American West. But more than that, it became a symbol of what love could accomplish when 2 people committed themselves to each other fully and completely, holding nothing back, facing every challenge as partners. Georgia and Ashton Brooks had lived ordinary lives in many ways. They had worked hard, raised children, dealt with the same struggles and joys as any other ranching family in Nevada. But their love for each other had been extraordinary, and that love had transformed everything it touched. It had turned a struggling ranch into a thriving enterprise. It had created a family culture of respect and partnership that endured for generations. It had given hope to countless people who heard their story and thought, if they could build something that beautiful, maybe I can too. And that, in the end, was their greatest legacy. Not the land or the cattle or the money, though those things mattered. Not even the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood in their name. Their greatest legacy was the example they set, the proof they provided that love is not just romantic fantasy, but real, tangible power that can overcome any obstacle and build anything worth having. She had ridden through lightning to save her herd, and he had ridden beside her through every strike. That simple act of courage and partnership had set in motion a love story that spanned decades and generations, a story that continued to inspire and uplift long after both of them had returned to the earth they had loved so much. And on the Calloway Ranch in Nevada, in a house built by loving hands and expanded by devoted labor, in barns and corrals and pastures that had seen a century and a half of careful stewardship, their presence could still be felt. In the way the current generation worked side by side, husband and wife, parent and child, respecting each other and supporting each other, in the way they faced challenges together, never giving up, always finding a way through, in the way they loved each other deeply and truly with the kind of commitment that builds legacies and changes the world. Georgia and Ashton Brooks had ridden through lightning together, and in doing so had created something eternal. Their bodies had returned to dust, but their love lived on, bright and enduring as the stars over the Nevada range, a light that would never fade, a story that would never end.